Julian, how are you?
Hey, pleasure. I'm doing good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing fine as well. Look, there's so much
Look,
to talk to you about, Julian. I don't even know where to start, but I will start since it's my responsibility to kick this off. Let's work this a little bit. You are not only a leading figure in crypto, but of course you have a background as a kite surfer. You're also a doctor, and you've written books. You're a speaker. You're doing all the right things. How did it all come together? Give me a sense of Julian as a 5 year old. Let's start there.
I mean, most of the times I do the right things. Every once in a while, you step totally in the wrong direction. I guess from a very young age on, I was an avid learner. I've always been someone who loves trying out new things. And I think that's the red line through my life, if you want to call it. It's always been about the world is your oyster. Be curious. Don't get comfortable in not growing. So for me, it was always I was always trying out new things, learning, growing. And I guess in everything that I do, that's kind of a premise.
Did you know that sports was not going to be your only thing, even though you're highly successful at it?
So my mom always tried to convince me. She was always like, Julian,
No, you'll
like
get
kite
older.
surfing, that's not gonna pay the bills when you're 40. You know, it's fun and great when you're 20 and there's no one to take care of and it's just yourself. And yeah, if at the end of the month the bank account just goes to zero and it's all good. But you know, once you have a family and a child, and at some point you need to do something serious. Yeah, I mean, deep inside, I kind of knew that. But for me, look, I was 17, turning 18 when I learned how to kite surf. Um, for almost 10 years, I was paid to travel the world, to see over 100 countries, to be gone for about 250 days in a year. I had this tagline on my Facebook account: "Your dream holiday is my daily office," and it was the best thing that you could give a 20-year-old. I think there is no better time, obviously, to do that. Just live in the moment. I had, I flew to Brazil, kite surfed there for 3 months. I had no clue how I'm gonna pay for the flight back. But you know, the curious thing is, I didn't even care. It didn't matter, and it was so pure. Life was so pure, and that also gives me a lot of peace today. So I don't have to travel. I'm like with the COVID situation. Yeah, sure, I would have loved to leave. I live in Singapore today. I would have loved to leave the island, and but yeah, it's all good. I've seen so many things. So yeah.
Look, I think that gives you an important confidence and balance, right? So you have a bit more patience, I guess, now than in your impatient, wild, roaring 20s, I guess.
I mean, I wish. I wish I was a bit more patient. I think it, I don't know who always says this, but make your mistakes early. Like try out so many things. Do your mistakes as early as possible. I lost all. I made tons of money in my kite surfing times just because I had so many great sponsorship deals, and I was just one of the first ones in that market. And I'm I lost it all with stupid decisions when I was 22, and that was a lot of money. I lost 80,000 euros, so about $100,000. Yeah, I mean, in like looking at a real grown up with a family, maybe $100,000 is not that much capital anymore. But for a 22-year-old, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I lost it all. And there were so many important lessons in there that, yeah, it's good that I lost it early.
I'm so glad you shared this because I mean you must be aware of this that when you are very successful and the stuff you're doing now is successful and you come off as just very confident, it actually isn't. It's like people are attracted to it, but they're also a little scared and they're a little annoyed. So I think it's good that you share that the journey hasn't exactly been always perfect.
A perfect is far from reality. I don't know. I don't. Sometimes I'm like, wow. I don't know if I did more things right in life or more things wrong. And I don't know. I guess the good thing, the really good thing is if you don't do anything super stupid, right? That has really like permanent consequences. Life is actually really forgiving in a sense that you don't have to hit that many balls to like to get to where you want to get. it's actually okay if you miss 10 and then suddenly you see one coming just perfect and you just swing the thing and it's a home run. And life, I think people tend to forget that. And people, after missing two balls, they get scared, they get discouraged. And I think that's a really, that was one of the things I just got to learn in life.
Hmm. You have said that your vision is to bring blockchain awareness to 1 billion more people by 2025. That's, first of all, a lot of people. Second of all, enormously aggressive timeline. Um, how's that going?
Well, I set that goal in 2015, so it's now 6 years ago. Um, I was just coming. So I worked as a medical doctor until 2012, and then I was just missing all these freedoms in life, and being able to kind of travel and try out things, and just again grow, be a bit crazy. And so for about 2.5 years, I was kind of stumbling with left and right, back and forth, not really knowing where I was going to end up. In 2014, I learned about blockchain, and in 2015, that ecosystem really got me. And I started educating specifically the German speaking market, but also the international market. And so I always said, I need to do something that really excites me. Just having a YouTube channel, I don't know if that really gets me up for every video. And so I said, hey, what really excites me is over the next 10 years, there's 1 billion people who learn about blockchain, because somehow I kind of help them. And yeah, that has always been driving me. I would say that, I don't know, probably 90% of the German speaking market actually learned about blockchain and crypto because of my videos, because of my books, because of a lot of things that I've done, right? Will I get to 1 billion people by 2025? Probably not. But it doesn't matter, because there's millions of people that got into blockchain, and I probably wouldn't have touched those millions of people had I not set the goal of 1 billion people, because I wouldn't have started.
Fascinating stuff. So you do have quite a big following in both the crypto space and in I think other places. 100,000 regular followers you claim. Is that kind of across all your channels? Like a lot of it is YouTube, a lot of it is through
I mean, now
Twitter.
it's almost a million. Yeah, I don't always update the numbers. I
Yeah.
have now 200,000 on YouTube, getting close to 100,000 on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. Humongous email subscriber list. Yeah, huge podcast. Again, I would say 75% is German speaking, and then 25% is international. Yeah, it's
We'll
across
get
all the various
Yeah.
channels.
We'll get to some of the substance of it because, it is indeed actually a field that needs education in the sense that
Yeah.
it's fast moving, it's super interesting, it's changing things in the world. But how do you think of your role as an influencer? Do you think that uh, you have a special responsibility? So, once you've succeeded at having a fairly enormous reach, that's a very big reach. What is your responsibility? You think about that when you issue a new video? Like, have I really understood this? What people are going to do with this insight? Because influencers, that's the point. You influence people's decisions, and these are financial decisions. They're not just, oh, I'm going to go buy a record by this artist. No, this is the real deal, right? It could be they're investing money that they would have put in their house or something based on listening to you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see myself as an influencer. I guess I am, but I always see myself as a business owner. For me, social media is really a tool, as an extension for my business. When I talk about things, especially on a financial side, most of the time, or with most all the time, I actually talk about when people should invest, that they should invest in Bitcoin. And I have and I talk about investing single digits in percentages of their own, of their own liquid capital. I feel very comfortable that such a statement is, in a worst case, not destructive to their entire situation, and in a best case, really impactful to their financial situation. And so and that's what I always kind of expect. I kind of think through. I always think through the worst case scenario that I'm about to talk, what would be the effect and what is the best case? And I try to weigh those, and then I always go a bit on the cautious side, simply because I know how people are. I tell them, hey, take 1% and put it into Bitcoin, and they're like, oh, he said go all in, and then yeah. So I always try to be on the extra cautious side. Yeah, and you see this and all the. I mean, there's a lot of crypto YouTubers and a lot of, and I guess the biggest thing that I always get is that I'm someone who's super, super rational. I don't do daily trading updates. I always talk about a 4-year, 5-year, 10-year time horizon. I feel very comfortable discussing these things. So when someone says, even at 65,000, Julian, should I buy Bitcoin? I'm like, yeah, you should. You should put 5% of your holdings into Bitcoin. And I would say over the next 5 to 10 years, I'm very, very confident that the prices are going to be higher than the 65,000, right? Maybe not next month, maybe not in 3 months. And so that is just how I try to approach things.
Well, let's get into the meat of it. So, what is it about decentralized finance? First of all, how do you explain it to people? And what are the problems that this new system fixes?
Decentralized finance is, in contrast to centralized finance that we know as the banking system, the traditional fiat, the euro, the dollar system is everything is decentralized. And with everything, we're actually talking about 6 functions of it. The very first one was what Bitcoin started to solve in 2009. It's basically creating value. It's creating money, but not on a centralized basis, decentralized, and also being able to transfer that value. And that's what Bitcoin does extremely well. I also tell people all the time, I would be very careful in investing into a project that claims to be better at at those 2 functions. I think that's very, very tricky. And then we saw an extension, mainly with Ethereum, of the DeFi space, which was lending value, exchanging value, predicting value, tokenizing value. These are all things that Ethereum started doing. And obviously, many, many other projects try to compete there. And that's just how I see it. So all that the DeFi space does, it started with Bitcoin. And now today we have hundreds and thousands of projects in that space who try to do those things in a decentralized manner rather than a centralized manner. And again, I always highlight here one thing. Decentralization will always only win if trust in the centralized party fades. That is important. Bitcoin will not succeed if people trust the dollar, if people trust the euro. There's very little reason to have Bitcoin if people are happy with dollars and euros. The same with any decentralized platform like Ethereum. If exchanges do a fantastic job, if the lending services work really well, there's very little reason to need decentralized ecosystems. And so to me, decentralized finance is always a bet on decentralized systems somehow not performing as well as people would hope they would.
So I want to go more into the meat of this argument from a bunch of angles. But first, let's just tackle the big one, which is in the long term, if you're right, if this actually hinges on some amount of mistrust in the existing system, aren't there are many options here though, because central banks are now looking into this as well. There's a chance that the system will co-opt at least some of the logic of blockchain into their system. It's not A or B. It's not centralized system versus a decentralized. Or don't you agree that there are many scenarios in which nation states start to issue and use it as part of their system, whilst not necessarily getting rid of fiat currency? So, I mean, there are many intermediate scenarios here, aren't there? And what would that mean if that's the case?
Okay, so let's define a couple of things. Fiat means that it's a centralized party that dictates the value. So the value comes from a point of authority. Whether that value is represented as paper money, as a digital form of money, or as stored on a distributed ledger is quite irrelevant. So as on a distributed ledger, we would call it a centrally backed digital currency, CBDC. These are all forms of fiat at the end. And I am not of the opinion that fiat systems will go extinct. I actually think they will flourish. They will go on a blockchain. They will stay centralized. Things will still be priced in them. I do not see Bitcoin or any other form of a truly decentralized ecosystem to take over a centralized ecosystem. And the reason for that, and we see this all the time, is decentralized systems are only good at one thing, and that is you don't have to trust an individual party. But if there's no one that you can trust because you just trust the entire system, who's in charge? Who's taking control? Who is adapting to change? Who is growing? At the end, the only constant is change itself. So we will constantly change. So how will Bitcoin make sure? And we saw this, and this is the interesting thing now. Over the last 3 months, over the last 2 months, we saw a completely new trend emerge, and that is the focus in Bitcoin on green energy, on the mining aspect of it. And that's a completely new topic. And this topic was never really brought up over the last, I don't know, 10 years. And suddenly it comes up. So what happens? What happens is Michael Saylor steps up and says, let me take charge of that. Let me kind of create this council that cleans everything up. That is something, that's centralization. But is this bad? No, it just means that it just highlights the difficulties we have with a truly decentralized system. And I see this with every decentralized financial ecosystem. There's always change, always. And so will we ever see a mix? A mix by definition can't work. We will see parallels. We will see centralization and decentralization. And sometimes the decentralized side is more interesting, and sometimes the centralized side is more interesting. The reason why I just don't understand how a mix would work, because a decentralized system that mixes with a centralized system will always become centralized. And so to me, there's nothing bad with this, right? Governments. I don't see a way where governments will actually try to use a decentralized form of money, which would be gold. I don't see them doing that because it loses a lot of the power that they have and that they use from a centralized fiat system. But that doesn't mean that it's either dollar or gold. These things coexist, and I think that's really healthy and that's supernatural. But you need to have this escape route, especially in the digital world, and that to me is what the DeFi space actually allows.
I like the way you're arguing here because I see a lot of the opposite by people who don't really think it through to the end. I think that some of the fascination around decentralization generally comes from people who don't like centralization, point blank, and who are assuming that this is going to kind of topple all of the bad centralized authority structures that they never really liked. You seem to have kind of, I don't know, grown out of that idea in a certain sense, and you're not really thinking of it that way. That is interesting.
To me, I mean, I just know that at the end, you will always. I mean, the best example on why a truly decentralized system will not survive in the long run is the bystander effect. If you don't have, if you have two people in charge, no one is in charge. And we have seen this over and over again. If someone needs help, the more people there are around, the crazy thing is, the lower the chance that someone will help that person. It's the bystander effect, been tested over and over and over again. So as long as us humans don't significantly change in the way we feel ownership, the way we feel responsibility, and I don't see this over the next couple thousands of years, truly decentralized systems will work for certain periods. Then someone needs to step up. People tend to forget that. Satoshi stepped up at the very beginning when there was a bug, an integer overflow bug, and suddenly there were, I think, trillions and trillions of excess Bitcoins in the system. He stepped up and said, this decentralized system is going to become centralized in this very moment. Let's change something. Boom, worked, all fine. Barry Silbert, people just blocked this out, stepped up in 2017 after years of debate on how does Bitcoin continue. He called for the New York agreement. Suddenly, SegWit 2.0 was there, and boom, suddenly there was a change. In this very moment, centralization happened. And I think we're seeing the similar thing right now. That to me is nothing negative. It just shows that any system, whenever there's change needed, needs to have leadership. It needs to have people that step up, that actually can make this change happen. Where to me, this true decentralized character comes in, that people step up by merit. They don't step up by authority. They step up by merit. And I think that's what to me is this true fundamental form that to me actually describes this decentralized ecosystem. And I think that's
Hmm.
the really important part. And we don't see this in many, many other ecosystems.
Hmm. Well, the big questions that I'm sure you cover on your shows is to discuss this idea that when something grows this fast, isn't there something murky here that we're not getting, but will eventually get discovered? Like, there's obviously Ponzi scheme thoughts. There's, is this really value at the end of the day? How do you answer questions like that? They could come from many angles. They could be like, I don't understand it, so how could it be real? It could be it grows so fast, so how could it be real? Or it fluctuates so much, how could that be real? How do you answer all of these critical questions? Or, will my mom ever use it? I mean, it's so complicated. How can it be real? There are many ways that you could kind of attack this and say, this isn't real, or it doesn't feel real to me.
I'm always someone who tries to answer things from a very fundamental standpoint. That's what you do in medicine. You don't try to treat a symptom. You try to treat the disease, and then you actually try to treat the human being. And so you need to understand a lot of things fundamentally. So for me, the very fundamental question here is there value in Bitcoin, for example? Is there value in a decentralized financial system? So let's ask ourselves, what's value? First of all, value always lies in the eye of the beholder. There's no absolute definition of value. This doesn't exist. Value actually comes from three things. It comes from the utility something has. It comes from the number of people who need that utility or who like this utility. And the last thing, the scarcity of that utility. And that describes value of everything. The reason why people have such an easy time valuing stocks is, especially cash flowing stocks, because the utility of that is cash. And the utility of cash is very clear to most people. It's cash by definition is a scarce resource because otherwise it wouldn't be valuable. And pretty much the entire world agrees on cash being valuable. So it's very easy to at least understand that a cash flowing company has value. And then the only discussion is how much discount do you give it? How many years in the future do you calculate it? And that's an entire science as of it all. But that's why it's so easy. So as soon as we have to things that are not cash flowing, especially in the financial space, it gets very, very tricky to define the value there. And that's where the question then really comes, is this a Ponzi scheme or not? And no one is able to clearly answer it because the value or the utility there is very subjective. So where I see the utility of Bitcoin is really that decentralized gold character. It's something that's scarce, verifiably scarce, and on the other hand, that more and more people agree on it being useful and being scarce. And what's the useful part? It is that I can send value on the internet digitally without a trusted intermediary. And that's completely unique. There's nothing else. Obviously, there's a lot of copycats, but there's nothing else that we know of that can do that. And so now the only question is how high is that utility? And that's now where the price fluctuation comes from. That utility is very difficult to grasp because if you are in the US or if you're in Europe, the utility of being able to do that with PayPal and with credit card payments and with instant bank transfers and with Venmo, the utility is debatable. But as soon as you go into more war battle zones, as soon as you go into more authoritarian zones, as soon as you have to be a bit more protective about your assets, about like your assets being seized, that utility straight away shoots up. And so that is where a lot of the emotional value comes in. And that's what makes it so difficult right now for people to price. And that's also the reason why there's so much fluctuation. Over time, I think we're having a way easier time in understanding the value of it with the utility side, that the emotional character goes away more and there's more reason in it. But we still see it with gold today, which has been around for thousands of years. And I don't think there's anyone out there who says gold is worthless. We can discuss what the actual price is, but I don't think even a Warren Buffett, who's a gold critic, says gold should be priced at zero. I don't think he says that. I think the question is, should it be priced at $2,000, at $1,000 or $500 or $10,000? He says he doesn't know, and that's why he doesn't buy it. And so I think with Bitcoin, it's going to be a similar idea. At the moment, people are still debating Bitcoin's price being zero should be the fair price, but I think that's going to go away, and we're going to go more into a sense, okay, should it be priced at 10,000, at 100,000, at a million? That's going to be more of a debate going forward because the utility character becomes clearer.
Well, I mean, you have a great point about potentially what this could do for, I guess, the unbankable, currently unbankable people and, the developing world's economies generally. Do you think that is going into the calculation of how, maybe more wealthier countries are thinking about the rollout of this technology and utility? Because literally, if you are right and this is a real thing that can transfer value, in these sort of currently unbankable situations, there's an enormous amount of value waiting to be unlocked, even if it is very little for each individual. If it is growing, these are many people who don't have access to any kind of growth capital. So even if it's growing from 0.3 to 0.5, that's massive for an enormous amount of people. When will decentralized finance be globalized in that sense and truly be accessible to, let's call it, the world's unbankables?
I mean, you're making a really great point, and I would love to expand this, like you mentioned at the end of the part of the question, to the true DeFi space. Not only the first two function sets, which are creating value and transferring that value, which is what Bitcoin does, but really to the exchanging. That's a totally different ballgame. Exchanging means on a blockchain, I can give you A, you give me B, and you only get A if I get B. That's a game changer if this happens decentrally. The lending side of it, right? That's at the predicting side. It's just absolutely insane. When will we hit on a global scale? I think it always comes down to the pain point of leaving the current system. That's always, I think, a bigger factor than just an attractive alternative. You need to have pain in the current system, and you see this all the time. You see this in Venezuela. It's so crazy when you go on Reddit and you see those Reddit posts about moms, for example, posting there how they invested their bolivares into Bitcoin all the time. And now, when they had a child, the reason why they could go actually into a hospital and get their child born in a hospital and they could pay for all those things, that was because they didn't get bogged down with the inflation of the bolivares, but they could actually pay with their Bitcoin that capped the value. That to me is just absolutely insane, right? Someone in the US or someone in Europe would probably not share such a story because there's not enough pain to go out from the current system. So it always depends on the current system that is not functioning right? So if you ask me how does this work on a global scale, on the one hand, it will depend on the pain that people have from the current system. And on the other hand, obviously, what's their educational level and their access level? Someone that already doesn't have access to the internet, and there's still a lot of regions in the world that don't properly have access to the internet, they will not have access to a layer on top of the internet, which is a blockchain. So that's just not possible. But other than that, it's inevitable. You will have more and more movement into this ecosystem because every centralized system, as good as it may be, at some point it screws up. At some point it makes a mistake. One thing that a decentralized system is just not really good at is fast decision making. It's super slow, which is a downside and upside. A centralized system is really quick at decision making. So, and no one makes perfect decisions all the time. So at some point, someone makes a mistake. And that's when it's always a good escape route to have this decentralized system.
Julian, you talked about some of the shortcomings of the current centralized system, but we've also talked about some shortcomings of the current DeFi systems. Well, one of them being that it isn't a globalized system yet because it does rely on technology that is nascent and that is somewhat complex, and it's certainly compute hungry, which is expensive. And arguably over the last few months, where the world has become more sensitized to green issues and these massive server parks and all of that stuff, so there are some issues. There might be some security issues. Certainly, some people would claim that there have been hacking scandals. There's exploits. There's of course also the chance that if the majority of actors on these chains are malicious, right? The assumption is, even in the algorithms, is that the majority of actors have to be benign. If the majority of actors actually turn out to be malicious, then even the blockchain protocols have a problem, don't they? So give me a sense of what you see as the biggest shortcomings, and what are people in the system or outside it trying to do to fix it. And we can get into cake as part of that.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest shortcoming is access. It's and it's actually a two-sided thing. On the one hand, um, it's identification towards the blockchain. It's so difficult to identify yourself uniquely towards thousands of servers without an intermediary. And the only way we do it right now is through very long, randomly generalized numbers that we call private keys, that through cryptography interact with other private keys or public keys and generate new sets of numbers, and we can prove and verify. And that's how we do it. And for example, I mean, one of the short-term steps here, right? For example, with Cake DeFi, what we do is we have all those DeFi services, lending, staking, liquidity mining, tokenization, like really, really exciting services that the majority of the people cannot really access. So what we do here is we provide a platform that allow people to access those services, and it shows exactly how powerful this is. We started 2 years ago. We have close to $1 billion customer funds with us right now. It's just insane growth. But again, on the long term, and that's something we actually really think about as a company, because we know that as a long term, it's actually not a viable business model for. And the funny thing is, Coinbase knows it themselves. Coinbase filed that in their filing, that in their IPO filing, that they will have to change their business model because it won't work in the long term, because more and more people will learn, right? So this is also something we know. And I guess the long-term thing, right? And I think that's probably the absolute magic. That would be the kind of magical touch to everything, would be how could you identify yourself in an easier manner towards thousands and millions of servers? I think no one has a right answer right now because we all don't really know. Any answer that you would say, fingerprint or iris scan, always has some centralized technology in the middle that can be tampered with. So it's really, really tricky. No one really knows the answer. And until we have, people will have to use private keys. And obviously, the longer Cake DeFi is going to make great money, and the more time we have, provide a great service to our customers, and until we figure out what we have to change and adapt. And I mean, we have ideas, but that's a general problem in the ecosystem.
So Cake DeFi is Singapore based, and you had like you said, experienced enormous growth. How do you explain that? I mean, the current clients that use Cake essentially are relying on this intermediary to understand and to exploit and to kind of, I guess, monetize and use you as a platform service in some way. Um, what do your clients say about why they use you? Because there are many ways they could access this system, and they
Yo, even
choose,
themselves, yeah, even
or even
themselves,
just
yeah,
doing them
yep.
themselves. Is so your arbitrage is the complexity. So in a certain sense, you're sort of hedging that there is this complexity, and for now it exists and it's real, and it's stopping a big group of people from doing it on their own.
100%. I mean, one of the services we provide, for example, gives people 100% per year on their crypto. 100%. When people see this, they always think, oh, that must be a scam. That can't be true. And the thing is, what they don't understand is it would be the same in the banking world. If there was the only bank who could provide a lending service, they would make thousands of percent in return because they would be the only ones. Because there's such an information arbitrage that people can do. But now there's hundreds and thousands of banks. Suddenly there's competition and more people, and all the interest rates gets diluted basically over all those people. In DeFi, it's exactly the same thing. The more people, the more capital understands what's happening, the lower the returns go. And we have seen this. I remember at the very beginning, about half a year ago, when we, for the very first time, we offered those really crazy high return services, we were at tens of thousands of percent. It's absolutely crazy. So now we're at 100%. And I forecast the growth we have over the next 1 or 2 years, those percentages will go into the 10 or 20%, definitely way lower, because more and more and more people, more and more capital will use them. So the first thing, obviously, is, as you mentioned, it's the user experience. It's way easier to use us, and customers share that. But then the second thing, and I think that's where, even in the future, and that's what we're going to focus a lot on with the company over the next 5 or 10 years, so as a long-term business model, is to be this one-stop hub that gives you access to a lot of things. And that actually has a lot of merit, because we are blockchain agnostic. I don't see a world in the future where there's only one blockchain to rule them all. I think we'll see more and more blockchains. So it will need those hubs that actually bundle those together, where, yeah, some people say, I don't have a problem storing 25 different wallets and dealing with 25 different systems. That's fine. But I think the majority will just say, oh, you know what? That's just such a hassle. Let me just go in one place, one stop. I have access to so many things. Right now, we only offer cryptocurrencies, but actually in Q3 this year, we want to start with stocks and precious metals and commodities. And so suddenly we're going to start opening up the entire kind of exposure and system. And I think that adds a lot of value to the customer that just doesn't want to have 60 different things, but it's this one-stop place. Yeah.
So who is your main customer? These are not individuals; they're more exchanges and other actors that are using your service.
Actually, it's a typical retail customer. A lot of people call us the Asian BlockFi. So I hope that by the end of the year they call us more the Asian Robin Hood, or an Asian kind of wealth front or something. That would be kind of the expansion we would love to have, not only in the crypto side, but for us, a typical customer has about, I don't know, $5,000 to $10,000 with us. They don't do any trading, because we are not an exchange. We don't offer exchange service. They are the typical long-term kind of focused person that says, look, I have those $10,000. Sure, I want to take 50% on those per year in return. Some say, no, you know what? I want to have way less volatility. That's way too crazy. Just give me 5%. And some say, no, YOLO, I need 100 or 200%. And so depending on that, they have different options in how they allocate their cryptocurrencies. That's the typical kind of customer. Obviously, very Asian focused. Because of my influence, we have a lot of Europeans. We do have a few Americans, but very few. Not the
And
main target
how
market.
do you typically allocate people's money? What are, like, option A, B, and C? So if I wanted to go to the risky route, where would my money be stored,
I mean, the
or where would you
riskiest
put it?
one would definitely be liquidity mining, simply because you have to allocate pairs. And the main risk is something called an impermanent loss risk, which means if one of those currencies moves extremely to the other side, you just lose a lot on this exchange rate. And so, yeah, it helps if you kind of allocate coins that generally move in the same direction. But obviously, if you allocate the less volatile coins, the return automatically is lower, because more people use that. And so if you go more the high risk route, the high return route, you generally have a bit more volatility. So that is definitely the more high risk. The lowest, but again, you can get 100% plus per year. So everything there's always a flip side to it, right? And then you
Yeah.
have the more lower risk, typical lending, similar like what BlockFi does, and that's on the 5, 6, 7% per year. Quite straightforward. Some of our customers may call it the boring route, but it's very straightforward. Not many surprises. And then in between, you have the shades. You have staking that sometimes goes into the 20, 30, 40%, some even a bit higher. So that's kind of the range there. Yeah.
Hmm.
People have to choose for themselves. So that's also important. We're not like a fund, or people really have to kind of make the decision for themselves. That's also from a compliance perspective very important, that the customer actually has to make a decision what they're doing.
Jillian, I want to talk about future use cases for decentralized finance and blockchain platforms. You're a physician yourself. There is a big discussion on vaccination passports at the moment. You have sort of even just healthcare data and patient data questions. what are some of the more advanced use cases that you think that this platform is ideally suited for, or could be tweaked to engage with?
Yeah, I mean, the entire medical side, that's what got me into blockchain in 2014. That's what I actually would have loved to build. I would have, like, the vaccination passport, that was actually my, literally, that was my business case in 2014 when I was pitching to investors. Everyone thought that's just stupid. Like, no one will ever use that. But to be frank, had I started then, I would have not made it until when it was needed, right? And the first time this discussion came up was about half a year ago in 2020. So I would have not made it. So it would have been a stupid idea, because the right idea at the wrong time is a stupid idea. So yeah, so to be frank, it was a stupid idea in 2014. But I still think that at the end, it's more of a supply chain question, right? That's actually what it is, because what you're doing is you are tracking an item, and in this case, a human being. You're tracking an item status across various steps. And so basically, what you're doing here is you're tracking the vaccination first, and that gets produced somewhere. So that's actually like this entire vaccination debate then goes away. And then you're tracking the human being, and somewhere they meet. And then from that on, other steps happen. And so it's more of a supply chain question, more of a business development question rather than a blockchain question. I think that's going to be massive in the future. I think a lot of this stuff is actually going to happen, especially when countries have to work together and no one wants to have the other country be in charge of the data. And so suddenly everyone can be in charge of the data. Actually, everyone themselves is in charge of the data, especially with data privacy. So to me, that entire medical topic is, I mean, it's huge right now. The only thing is, I don't think a startup will actually do it. I do believe governments will have to kind of set this up.
Interesting. So the future of DeFi for you is full of these use cases. Where do you think who do you think governs what's going to happen? Is this also a decentralized process? Which use case is DeFi going to move to next? Because clearly all of these basic financial use cases are going to take a while to sort of shake out through the system. And some people I talk to are sort of saying, let's get those right first, and then we'll move to those other areas much later. What's your thinking there?
Yeah, I think the killer kind of application right now is a bit more integrations and interoperability of a lot of those use cases, because at the moment everything is still a bit siloed. For example, I'm involved or I'm contributing to a blockchain project called DeFi Chain, really focused on various DeFi use cases for Bitcoin. And what the community tries to do there is really kind of interoperability between Bitcoin and many other kind of DeFi use cases. But there will be so many others, right? We have Cardano, and I don't know, we have the BSC ecosystem. But the question there is going to be, what's going to be the interoperability there? Because then this entire siloing is going to go away. So if you ask me what's the future there, the future is really more this interoperability, because then suddenly you can actually track things in a completely different manner, and you need to trust fewer parties, because suddenly these decentralized databases can actually communicate info among each other. And to me, and I think we're actually seeing this right now. We see projects really focus on this interoperability, focus in this direction. I think that is really, really key. Yeah, and I mean, we're trying to do all these things. On Cake, we're trying to be blockchain agnostic. Yeah, all the ecosystems that I, for example, invest my personal money in, Bitcoin, Ethereum, DeFi chain. A lot of these things are projects where I also try to see this openness, to kind of experiment, to explore, to go further. I think that's really, really important for the ecosystem.
If you just will muse a little bit with me on sort of this journey that decentralized finance has been on, can you understand that there still are people who are sitting there on the sideline waiting to get in, or maybe not waiting to get in? They're sort of saying, well, I've seen this before with other things. I'm usually not risk averse, but this just sounds too crazy to be true. And what is your message to people who feel that way?
I would say they're right, because just like in anything, most of the time only 1 to 2 to 3% actually survive, and 99 to 97% uh, die off. We saw the same thing during the ICO bubble in 2017. Most of the people lost a lot of money in there, and they were right saying that all these projects went to zero. But some of the biggest blockchain projects today are part of those 1 to 2 to 3% that survived. And that's just like in any ecosystem. That's in any startup. That's whatever you do. 95, 96, 97% of those projects don't make it. If you are an angel investor, a VC investor, you know those numbers, right? And you invest accordingly. Many retail investors just go and say, oh, this project, oh, for sure they're going to make it. And I'm going to go all in on this one project that no one has ever heard of, but you believe they're going to go to the moon. That is why, and I mentioned this at the very start when we talked about the influencer part, I believe if you want to have, and again, I don't even think Bitcoin is a done deal, right? At the moment, I would probably give it a bit higher than 50% that Bitcoin is still around in 10 years. But I would not give it a 99% chance that Bitcoin is around in 10 years. So to me, it just has a very high likelihood right now, and very likely is a 60% chance, maybe. So investing accordingly. So to me, that is the project that I would take if you want to have the safest of them all. And again, there's a 40% chance it's gone. And I want to be that clear on that. So just keep that in mind, in all of that. Yeah.
I think that's very fair. I mean, if it if there was no risk in this, then you'd be a complete idiot to stand outside. But because there is risk, I mean, truly, you need to decide what the risk profile is. The question, of course, is the regular person in a position to have the data to actually assess the risk? And I think that really is the big question for all of us.
I mean, 100%. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And that is also why I will hit down on the same point. It's the point that news outlets don't want to hear. It's the point that, I don't know, other influencers don't want to hear because they want to have the next best thing. But at the end, Bitcoin is your safest bet. And I would also, and to double down there, I truly believe having 0% Bitcoin allocation is the same mistake as having an overly exuberant allocation on a never heard before coin that's just all your money. So I think both are silly mistakes. They are uneducated. To me, it doesn't matter how old, how young, what your financial situation, there should be an allocation. If you are in the investing, if you're interested in investing, if you're actually looking into investing, you should have a Bitcoin allocation. We can discuss, should this be 0.1%? Should it be 5%? Should it be 10%? That's discussable. And I would start with a lower number. But yeah, any statistic you look at, any kind of analysis that you look at, it's very clear that Bitcoin is a non-correlated investment. It reduces the volatility of your total portfolio while actually increasing returns. The numbers are as straightforward as it can be. There's no opinion on this. This is purely statistical and mathematical. Now, of course, no one knows what the future will bring. That's why play it a bit more on the safer side. But any other decision there, and you can see this. Ray Dalio is moving in. There's more and more of these super large investors who start to understand that. So, yeah.
Thanks, Julian. We could go on forever. This is it is one of the fundamental discussions of this decade, but perhaps also of the next, right? So thank you so much for this. I hope I can check in with you later. That there seems to be enough volatility that we can have this discussion, every month, every year, if you want, because there will be a very different spin on this, even just a year from now, for sure.
I mean,
So
of
thanks.
course, now it's end of May. Crypto just dove almost 50%. So yeah, appreciate it, Trond. Hey, really great. And yeah, if anyone wants to reach out, I'm on Twitter at Julian Hosp. Would love to hear. And yeah, always looking forward to getting feedback and questions, and
Yeah,
looking forward to help.
great. Thanks a lot. Julian, I'm going to do one thing. I actually discovered I need to go on a call in 4 minutes, but I'm going to have you talk for 30 seconds on the headline. So I'm going to just tee it up and see if you can just give us a little statement on. So I'll say, Julian, what's DeFi's impact on business and society in the next decade? That's what I'm going to ask you. And then just talk for 20, 30 seconds on that, please.
Mm.
Julian, what's going to be DeFi's impact on business and society in the next decade?
It's going to be massive. Decentralization is incredibly important to understand. A lot of decentralized services, and that's business and society, are going to get disrupted. So, absolutely important to understand.